Do I believe there's danger to kids if this passes? Absolutely not. Am I buying that the kids will be abused or attacked or any of the other claims that are being made predicting a doomsday? Nope. It's a matter of representing the interests of everyone, every teacher, every child, every mother, father, every taxpayer. Anyone that knows me knows that I work hard to represent my constituents and the teachers in my district, even in the most dire of personal circumstances. I have my own personal beliefs about some of the policies that we tackle each year. Look at the calendar and the cell phone policies. Many of those are voted on by looking at the consensus of my constituents, not my own personal beliefs. I also like to get as much information as possible before I vote on an issue. Knowledge is power, right? On this particular issue, I have asked 100 questions so I could ultimately make an informed decision. When we heard the original proposal by Dr. Kisner and staff on December 11th of last year, I raised the following questions. Has this been vetted by the Parent Advisory Committee? Has it been vetted by the Teacher Advisory Committee? Has it been vetted by the Equity and Diversity Committee? Has this policy been given a legal review by someone other than the attorneys that drafted it? Do we know how much it will cost to renovate some of the bathrooms and add private changing areas to the locker rooms at each of our high schools and maybe even the middle schools? The answer to all of those questions was no, and the topic was tabled. Fast forward to this year, and the topic was resurrected and presented as a policy statement. I don't have a legal degree, I'm not an attorney, but I do have common sense, and when you change a policy, there's a potential for further action and repercussions to other policies that are already on the books. That has been proven to be true, and while I can't share them with you because the majority of this board voted to suppress that information, you're just going to have to take my word for it. Lastly, I wanted us to take the time to devise a policy that included a compromise that embraces all kids, all families, and all staff. A compromise that included some restroom renovations and the inclusion of private changing areas and locker rooms would have been an accommodation for a family to make that choice as a family. I don't believe that abdicating our responsibility as policymakers should be punted to the superintendent. By voting to allow the superintendent to make those implementation plans, without even knowing what the plan is, by the way, is putting the job that we were elected to do on the shoulders of the superintendent when it should be a board decision. For all of those things that didn't happen in this process, the fact that this is an all or nothing policy with no compromise, the lack of discussion on adding the issue to the CIP process, which is coming up next on the agenda, and the kicking of our responsibility as school board members to the superintendent and uninformed legal consequences we're putting on future boards, I will not be voting in favor of this policy.
Mr. McGosker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank everyone for attending tonight, those watching on TV and those who've sent emails on these policies, which I'll refer to from now on as the policy. The policy has most definitely engaged the community and garnered very respectful community involvement tonight in discourse, and so that I'm really appreciative. Regretfully, deep down, I just wish I had this kind of support and involvement seen tonight over the past weeks and years, my last 8 years on the board, to help me fight for teacher and employee pay, lower classroom size, and upgrading our rundown schools that some of our kids will again show up tomorrow morning. Some of my supporters may say that as a board member, besides some dirty words, I'm a straight talker who calls it like it is. I'm loyal. I expect leaders to lead and fight hard for our employees and our kids. So let's get to the straight talk. I see good in this policy. I see this policy as taking care of our kids and giving direction to our staff, even if it's only a small minority of our student body who's protected by these additional categories we add. This is a one-page policy. One-page policy. This says absolutely nothing about bathrooms, about locker rooms, about field trips, or additional categories. This is not the transgender policy. Rather, it's the policy that will support and show our kids who are in the minority, who are vulnerable, that we care. I see this policy as a signal to our staff that we care enough about the children under their care that we identify and call out in this policy those who are pregnant, have medical conditions, their marital status, genetic information, and gender identity. I see good in this policy. I see this policy as taking care of our staff and our kids, again, This is not the bathroom, locker room, or field trip policy. This is the treat our staff and our kids with dignity and respect policy. I see this policy as a show love for our most at-risk policy. As far as a speaker who spoke about the school board and a board member about the costing of ripping out urinals and changing our bathrooms, that's not the will of this board or the superintendent. Any board member with support with another member can request that the staff do an analysis and give costs. So please don't infer that the board is moving towards changing bathrooms by this policy. Again, I look to the good in this policy, the good that Dr. Kisner is leading this school division and who has common sense and credibility, things that we haven't had in the past, at least in my 8 years. Our employees and our kids who are under his charge are finally feeling a breath of fresh air. Don't believe me? Go ask him. I trust this man to implement a policy like he does all policies in our school division. We pay the guy a lot of money. We interview him. He's been a 20-year superintendent, and he and his staff implement the policy. But just for argument's sake, let's say that this policy somehow infringes on the rights of staff or students. It can be brought back at any time by a revote of this board. This is not a state or federally mandated policy as of yet. This policy, again, is not about bathrooms. It's not about locker rooms. It's not about field trips. It's about protecting and treating our students with dignity and respect and self-worth. It gives our staff needed direction and support while our children are in their care, most of the week, by the way. I hope the community will have a positive outlook on this policy and see the good in it. It may take some time. This is hard work. It's hard to view life from your neighbor's porch. I pray that this policy will help our most vulnerable children. But closing, if I can prevent just one policy or one suicide by one of our precious kids through the approval of this 240 words, for me, this vote is an easy yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Chase.
The main issue people seem to have with the proposed non-discrimination policy is the inclusion of gender identity and sexual orientation. I have received no emails related to any of the other proposed groups. The question I am asking myself is, are LGBTQ students experiencing discrimination in Stafford County Public Schools despite the policies currently in place? As I have been reading the hundreds of emails sent to this board, I noticed a pattern. I'm going to read some excerpts, see if you notice anything. I love all children, but I fully accept the need to be respectful of everyone's rights, but again, no student at any school should be bullied, intimidated, or otherwise accosted for any reason. However, while no one is in favor of discrimination, there is no partiality with the Lord. We are all equal in His sight and made in His image. But we support a zero-tolerance policy against the shaming, humiliating, or hurting of any child, whatever their identity or sexual orientation. But I do think it is important to treat all of our children with respect and to protect them from bullying. However, I think these emails indicate that there are many people in the Stafford community who are very uncomfortable with the existence of transgender children and therefore are advocating that we discriminate against these children. But perhaps this sentiment is not leading to discrimination of transgender students in our schools. Well, last October, staff at one of our schools did not know what to do with a transgender student during an active shooter drill. Everyone was rightly horrified, but many of us told ourselves that this was not discrimination. This was just confusion and a lack of training of staff. And after all, it was just a drill, And isn't that what drills are for? But I have been reflecting on this for months now. And at one of our meetings, the superintendent said we should not fool ourselves that incidents like this happen in a vacuum. Rather, they happen because there is a lack of clarity of purpose throughout the entire organization. So, I went back and read the action the board took 4 years ago with respect to a transgender child. The child had been allowed to use the bathroom they identified with, and then a parent complained, so central office reversed the decision, and then the parents appealed the decision to the school board. Now, let me note this was very unusual for a couple of reasons. First, I read through 8 years of school board minutes, and this was the only case I found of the school board conducting a hearing about a student accommodation. We normally leave this in the hands of the experts, our staff. What is more common is for the school board to hear appeals related to student or employee discipline matters. Second, when the school board comes out of closed session, we read out and report or make a motion for some action. Normally, we say something like, suspended student A for the remainder of the school year, or continued the expulsion for student C with alternative education offered. We don't publicly state which school the student attends or what the student did. We maintain these students' privacy, even if they were selling drugs on campus, bringing a weapon to school, or sexually harassing another student. But when the student was transgender, we deviated from our normal procedure. In addition to announcing where the student attended school, we also stated that the child was transgender and could only use the bathroom that matched the child's biology or a private facility. We announced to the entire school division that students could only go into facilities which were private or matched biological gender. So is it fair for this board to claim we bear no responsibility for what happened last October? Given the board's failure to respect a transgender student's privacy 4 years ago, the confusion about how to protect a transgender student during an active shooter drill last year, and the many negative emails directed at transgender students which I received, I have reached the conclusion that we need to include LGBTQ students in our non-discrimination policy. Let me finish with item 12 of the Stafford School Board Code of Conduct, which all 7 of us sign each year. Oops. I will always remember that the foremost concern of the board is to improve and enhance the teaching and learning experience for all students in the public schools of Virginia. Please notice there are no whiles, buts, or howevers in our code of conduct. Thank you.
Ms. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Ronalda Pamela Young. I go by Pam, she, her, hers pronoun. Since November the 13th, we had our first meeting after the lockdown. December 11, proposed policy was brought before the board. We had meetings on May 28th, June 11th, June 25th, July 16th, August 13th, with a public comment. Over 450 Dear School Board member emails were sent to us on this topic, and several of those were directed to me, as well as to others. But because of the overwhelming number of emails, I responded to those that were directed to me, and I even met with some of you. But one email stood out because this person did not mix words. I respect that. But he said what many of you did not want to come out and say. It reads, and I quote, "Do not implement an unnecessary policy that evidently arose out of a rare event in which the child in question should have been taken into the closest protected space, ... Given the nature of the emergency drill in question, to allow an extreme minority, I am a minority, and I've always been, and I can't hide it, right? Some transgenders, LGBTQ can hide, but I can't. to use this incident to force what appears to be a media-driven issue to overturn centuries of common sense. Comfortable, to stay comfortable, not accept change. And worldwide appreciation that there are two God-given, God-designed genders apparent of birth is unwise and does not represent the views, desires, and vote of vast majority of Stafford County parents and citizens. I've been living here over 30 years. I raised my kids here in Stafford County through elementary, middle school, high school. My daughter graduated from VCU, then Duke. She's an anesthesiologist. She's gonna serve in the Air Force, and she is a lesbian. I was raised in the church. I raised my children in church. I was a children's church teacher. I sung in the youth choir. I transitioned, not that kind, into adulthood, into the adult choir. I have 4 children. Now, are you telling me I need to do something different with that particular one? I love her for who she is. But putting my church aside, when I read and listen to comments like these, I hear the perspective being shared, but it also breaks my heart. I acknowledge their feelings, but the feelings are not facts. Here are the facts. Gender is a social construct. Yes, there are 2 sexes, male and female, assigned at birth. But we as a society created what gender is, which means we have the ability to update that definition with our current understanding. Remember when we blacks were 3/4 of a person, right? Chased by dogs. So that understanding suggests that people ought to decide for themselves what gender they identify with. But that is not what I'm here to do. That point about the media-driven issue that does not represent the views and desires of the vast majority of Stafford County parents and citizens, that simply is false. For one, the media is influenced by society as much as the other way around. And our society here in Stafford County, we do support passing a policy. We have to fight feelings with facts. The school system is the haven where all children should feel safe, where every child can succeed and receive an equal education when they come through our doors, regardless of their color, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, childbirth or related medical conditions, marital status, mental or physical disability, genetic information, and pregnancy status. These groups need protection from our bullies or those who would seek to divide us, discriminate against us. These groups need protection because they are vulnerable. They are not predators, as some of us want to think, waiting behind curtains to prey on our sons or daughters. There just isn't the evidence to support these fears. Let me repeat that there isn't statistically significant evidence to support the fears that protecting these groups would lead to other unprotecting the others. We will protect every child. If we were all equal, then we would not need a policy to protect these groups. But that is not the case, and then we need to design laws and policies that make us all a bit more equal. Other groups are being protected. Autism group, they receive an IEP, which is Individual Educational Plan. Why shouldn't this group? Like I said, I was remembering a time then we had our own bathroom. Yeah, now lines are long. I wish we did have one. But I wholeheartedly support this policy that does not what any parent ought to do for their children, protect them. Currently, 13 school districts in Virginia have non-discrimination protection for students and employees that include sexual orientation and gender identity. Include Albemarle, Charlottesville, Manassas, Prince William, Richmond, Norfolk, Virginia Beach. This accounts for more than 35% of Virginia's public school students and employees, according to the advocacy group Equality Virginia, source Fredericksburg. Let's not fall behind the trend in the Commonwealth. Let's pass the policy and protect our children, making sure they feel safe in schools, the place they often call their second home.
Mr. Cater.
I vote yes.
Mr. Cater.
It's not time to vote yet.
Okay.
Oh, it will be tomorrow.
I wish it was.
That's right.
I'm exhausted. You guys have spoken so eloquently. I just want to thank everyone for being here. I was brought to tears multiple times this evening by the respect that you all showed one another. Guys, we're each other's neighbors. Look around this room. We're all neighbors, and I appreciate that you afforded each and every one the opportunity to come up here and speak tonight. And you did it differently than we did last time, and I'm so wholeheartedly thankful for that. Wish you would have afforded me that opportunity a few minutes ago, but I'm not going to get on you for that. I sit up here, and that's what happens. So I've received hundreds of emails. I've spent hours on the phone with my neighbors here. We've talked about the Bible. We've prayed for each other. We've talked about family issues. I mean, hours and hours. This has been such a process, and if my eyes are crossing, it's because I was cross-eyed growing up, and it still comes back when I'm exhausted. I've had 3 surgeries. Yes, I was bullied. Thank you. Guys, we can have this conversation all day long, and everyone in this room is not going to agree. I've said it over and over again. This conversation can be about morals, religion, politics, theories, or just based on principle alone. We could argue it all day long and never come to a conclusion that we all agree on. I find that as a member of the school board, the best conversation I can have without being a parent of these children is, how can I best serve this child in the public school setting? How can I ensure that they have equitable access to an inclusive education that promotes and values every person? What can I do to ensure that our staff understand how they're supposed to treat every person? What does dignity and respect for every person within a school building mean? Guys, I want to make it very clear that this conversation didn't start because of a lockdown drill. This conversation has been ongoing for a very long time. However, it did become apparent when we had a lockdown drill that our staff don't know what they're supposed to do. For me, that was a large reason why this policy was so important. It's not an easy conversation to have, guys. But it's one that I find required opening ourselves up to acceptance of all people whose values aren't necessarily the same. It's taken a lot of research, a lot of talking to families who have experiences that I don't have, and it's taken a lot of prayer. I do believe that implementing this policy is the right thing to do for the children in Stafford County. And for that reason, I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Ms. Hazard?
I don't really have that much to add. I would like to thank the board, though, with regard to the anti-discrim language. I thank you for including the mental and physical disability. That was something that I had suggested, and I feel very, very strongly about that in this policy. I know we have many other focuses, but I do thank you to the board for that. I have, talked about, I'm not concerned with who this covers. I think it covers everybody, and I'm comfortable who it covers and that part of it, that we should not discriminate. I have no problem with that. I am concerned with the how and the board's involvement and the public's involvement going forward. We are charging Dr. Kisner, and I will certainly work with him with my concerns. I have tried to lay them out but he is charged with implementing the intent of the board. I think that's a very difficult thing to charge anybody with. For me, the only way to know the intent of the school board is to have the school board vote on it. And because the how and the implementation plans right now may not be coming back to the board, at least under how I read this, I have serious reservations. However, I do not have reservations about who we protect. We protect everybody. I believe we have to have a dialogue, and I would just ask the superintendent and this board for us all to take in. We all have so much information to us that we really need to think about the plan. And it may not be just a plan of who does what to whom. It may require, as we talked very early on in this process last fall, of education, training, and just understanding. I think there are groups, I believe at least 2 spoke tonight, and if I missed somebody, I apologize. I heard 2. You know, I would like to learn how that can help our community as well. So those are my comments.
All right, it's officially tomorrow. I'm last. First, I'd like to suggest, Dr. Chase, you may want to go back and look at the public comment period from when that matter was discussed. Was it 8 years ago? Because as I recall, there was an identification by a relative of the student. Could be wrong, it's getting late, but that was my recollection. That was not something the school board just, threw out there. Also, appreciate you reading the emails, but the buts had to do with how it affected someone's child. And it wasn't an accusation that there was harm or something like that, but there were concerns that it was a but. I have concerns about the policy. So I just wanted to clear that up. And anyone can get any of our emails. Can't get the legal opinion, but you can get our emails through the Freedom of Information Act. So I'm going to read my statement, and then we'll call for the vote. I have grave concerns about the process that was employed to get to where we are today with respect to the non-discrimination policy before the board for action. First, I do not believe that a transparent and unbiased approach was used to get the policy to this point. Second, I do not believe the policy is supported by the overwhelming majority of Stafford County residents who have respectfully voiced their objections and concerns to the school board, and which is important since there is no legal requirement or mandate to adopt this policy. I've heard from many residents of Stafford County, including persons associated with Stafford County Public Schools and those without direct ties to the schools. All who have contacted me have expressed compassion and concern for all students in Stafford County Public Schools, a desire that all students be treated with dignity and respect, and a desire that the privacy of all students be protected. The proposed policy does not protect the privacy of all students. The issues presented by the proposed policy are complex and involve potential privacy invasions for all students, in addition to personal and religious concerns expressed by students, staff, parents, and other Stafford community members. It has been suggested by some that this matter should be addressed only by persons who have children in our school. I disagree. I believe our entire community has an interest because of the impact of the proposed policies on our schools, and the voices of our community deserve to be heard and respected. Our community supports Stafford County Public Schools, and without community support, our schools would suffer greatly. Current law does not include gender identity discrimination as a suspect class that is protected. If this policy is adopted, once it is in place, Stafford County Public Schools will lose a substantial degree of discretion in how it chooses to accommodate the needs of individual students. Litigation will be more likely, as Stafford County Public Schools could then be open to charges, not that Stafford County is violating the law, but that Stafford County Public Schools is violating its own policy. A cardinal principle of law is a board must follow its own rules. Unlike the typical case where a policy is before the board for adoption, with implementing regulations presented simultaneously for approval by the board, in this case, there are no implementing regulations being proposed with the policy. Instead, the policy delegates development of, quote, a plan that implements the intent of the board as set forth in this policy, close quote, and further states that, quote, such plan shall be shared with the board for input and review. I view this delegation of authority as an abdication of responsibility and accountability on the part of the board, and a dereliction of our duty to our community, to whom this matter is of extreme concern. This is not the time to make an exception to a long-standing practice of the board approving regulations to implement policies adopted by the board. I firmly believe that Stafford County Public Schools could meet the needs of all students for dignity, respect, and privacy by exploring other means than the proposed non-discrimination policy. For the aforesaid reasons, and because I concur with the legal analysis presented to the board, I will be voting no to the proposed non-discrimination policy. All right. No further discussions. All in favor of the motion to approve the policy, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
Dr. Chase?
Aye.
Ms. Decatur?
Aye.
Ms. Hazard? Ms. Healy?
No.
Ms. Hollerbeck?
No.
Mr. McCosper?
Aye.
And Ms. Young? Aye. Motion passes.